This is an introduction to the first piece of Gemara that we find in Elo Metzios. So in order to understand this, we're going to go through some introductions and some facts that are going to help us understand the Gemara properly. First of all, it's worthwhile to think a little bit about why, even though there's a mitzvah to return a lost item, but there are times when the finder is allowed to keep what he finds. So one of the reasons is as follows. You may find something that does not have a sign, meaning a way for the owner, the claimer, to prove that it's his. And therefore, when the owner loses such an item, he realizes that there's no way that he's going to be able to prove that it's his, to claim it and get it back, and therefore he gives up hope. This is called Yeush. It also happens in a situation as follows. Suppose that the owner left something in a place and then he realizes that he left it there. It may or may not be worth his while to walk or travel back to that place to pick it up, depending on the value of the item. For example, let's say that you went to the park and you were playing ball and you put some coins on a bench while you were playing ball. You finished your game after a while, you went home, and you realize, oh, I left the change in the bench. Now, are you going to walk back to the park and pick up those coins? Depends. If you live a distance away, let's say it'll take you 10-15 minutes to walk back, and what you left in the bench was maybe 10-20 cents, it's not going to be worth your while. You're not going to come back. On the other hand, if you left, let's say, a $20 bill, yeah, you're going to come back. So therefore, when somebody comes to that bench and he sees the money there, so you have to make a decision. You have to figure out, is the owner likely to come back to pick up that money or not? And the way you decide is in terms of the value. If there is no value there, then you should think, yeah, the owner is probably going to come back, so therefore you shouldn't pick up the money and keep it. But on the other hand, if you see that it's a very small value and the owner is not likely to come back, therefore you're allowed to assume that the owner gave up hope. He's not going to come back, and therefore the property, the coins, become ownerless, hefker, and you are in fact allowed to keep it. So again, it depends on the value. So this is one way that you would be able to make an educated guess, an assumption, a reasonable assumption, in order to determine can you keep what you find or not. Another issue that we need to talk a little bit about in order to understand the Gemara is the Gemara is going to be discussing the Mishnah mentioned that if you find scattered fruit or scattered money. So what is the definition of scatter? This is a concept that is not, the Mishnah doesn't specifically define it. So the Gemara, as is the nature of the Gemara, is to explain and to clarify the Mishnah, because when the Mishnah was written, as we mentioned in our introduction, it was written in a very brief style. They were not allowed to write a lot. So they wrote very briefly, if you find scattered fruit. But it wasn't necessary for the Mishnah to specify what is the definition of scattered. So the Gemara find it necessary that as people knew less, we have to define it precisely for people to know. So when you say scatter to different people, that may mean different things. For example, in this illustration here, well, these three items are scattered. In the second illustration, they're more scattered. And in the third one, it's even more scattered. The space among them is greater and greater. So the question is, at what point do we consider something to be scattered? And this is going to be important because, again, the Mishnah said that if you find scattered fruit or scattered money, you have to keep it. Well, what exactly does the Mishnah mean when it says scattered? This will help us define what the Mishnah means. Usually, the Gemara begins by discussing the very first thing that a Mishnah mentions. In our Mishnah, the first example that was discussed was Matza Peiros Mefuzarin, if you find scattered fruit. So the Mishnah is going to discuss those fruits. Now, the Gemara is going to be focusing on wheat. So even though we normally don't think of wheat as a fruit, but we find that in Tanakh, A wheat, kernel of wheat, is actually called a pri, sometimes a fruit. So it's important to know the following. First of all, a stalk of wheat, this is how wheat looks when it grows. You notice that there are little pouches here. And if you look in the pouch, in this illustration, you will see that there is a bran, there is like a membrane that surrounds the grain, the germ, and this is the actual wheat. Now, in order to extract this wheat, they would take the grain into a threshing place. A threshing place is like this. This is an ancient threshing place. It was a floor of stone, of brick. And what they would do is either by hand, or like in this illustration, they would have an ox or a pair of oxen dragging something heavy. They would put a weight here, or a person would stand there, and the weight of this instrument, this tool, would actually crush these little pouches and expose the kernel of grain. Just to show you a short video of what that looks in action.
With the threshing board, as you pull the dog or the donkey around. This Mosi? Yes. This is Mosi, and which means banana. He pulls the threshing board around.
One final thing necessary for us to understand the Gemara properly, and that is that the Gemara often uses key terms. These key terms were embedded by the Amoraim, the rabbis who edited the Gemara, and these key terms serve to guide us as we go through the process of the Gemara. It helps us figure out when there is a question, when there is an answer, when we're trying to prove something, when we're trying to reject, when we're trying to challenge an opinion. So they help us understand the structure of the Gemara. In this unit, we're going to find a key term called Eichi Dami. Literally means, how is this? What is it like? So it's worthwhile to explain a little bit about the structure that is going to develop before we actually study the Gemara inside. When you see the word Eichi Dami, the following has happened in the Gemara. The Gemara gave a statement or an answer, and the Gemara now looks at that answer and says, wait a second. In what type of situation does that answer make sense? Because initially, when we look at that answer, the answer doesn't seem to fit in any situation that it would make sense. And the Gemara will then present two possibilities and show that in either one of those circumstances, the answer does not make sense. So what exactly is the logic behind that answer that would make the answer accepted? So this is how it works. Here we have a suggested answer. Then the Gemara says, Eichi Dami, we're challenging that answer. We fail to see when this answer would make sense. The Gemara then will present two possible scenarios, two possible situations, and show that this cannot be the situation in which the answer makes sense. And each of these boxes shows why this does not. So right after the Eichi Dami, the Gemara presents two scenarios, two situations, and shows that neither one of these situations could be the case, could be referring to the case that we just mentioned, and these are the reasons why. And then finally, the Gemara finds a situation where this answer makes sense, and this is the explanation how it makes sense. So with that information, we're now ready to begin the Gemara. Okay, the Gimel Mem indicates that we're going to begin studying the Gemara. This is the end of the Mishnah. The last word is Lehachris. And the Gemara is going to focus on the very first example that the Mishnah mentioned. If you remember, the Mishnah gave us a list of 10 examples of items that if you find them, you're allowed to keep it. The first one was Matza Peiros Mefuzarin, if you find scattered fruit. So the Gemara asks, Vekama, how much is this? Meaning, says Rashi, Vekama Chashuv Pizur. How much is considered scattered? Because again, the word scatter means different things to different people. So what exactly does the Mishnah mean when it says scatter? How is scatter something in order to be considered scattered? Answers the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Kav be'arba amos. 1 kav in 4 amos. A kav is a measurement of volume. It's about 2.5 pints. And Arba Amos is an area of about 8 feet by 8 feet, which means it's about half the size of a bedroom. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yitzchak explains, that if you find 2.5 pints of grain in an area of 4 by 4 amos, which is 8 feet by 8 feet, that is considered scattered. If the area is smaller than that, it's not considered scattered. If it's 4 by 4 or more, let's say it's 5 by 5 amos, 10 by 10 amos, that for sure is considered scattered. And therefore, if you find 2.5 pints in an area of 4 by 4 amos or more, then you can keep it. That's scattered. If you find 2.5 pints in an area that is smaller than 4 by 4 amos, let's say it's 3 by 3 amos, that's not considered scattered, and therefore you have to announce it or you have to leave it there. Now comes the Gemara and asks the following question: Eichidami, meaning what exactly is the case? The Gemara fails to see when would such an answer make sense. 1 kav in 4 amos, in what type of situation does it make sense to decide if you can keep it or not based on 1 kav in 4 amos? Explains the Gemara. I derech nefila, if you found the grain that is in a way of falling, means like it looks like it was just fell, it was thrown, then afilu tuva nami, even if you find more grain than that, nami also you should be able to keep it. Says Rashi, iderech nefila, if you find it in the way of falling, im mitzaam derech nefila, if you found the grain in a way that is falling, sheyesh ladas shelo unchu sham midas, that you should realize that they were not placed there knowingly, the guy didn't put it on purpose, ela naflu, but rather they fell, afilu tuva, mikav nami, even if you find more than 1 kav, also you should be able to keep it. The kevan de'en bahem siman, since this fruit, this grain has no sign to identify it, yushe meyayish, the owner surely gave up hope. So it cannot be that the Gemara is referring to a case where the grain was found thrown, because if that's the case, then why should a kav in 4 amos be something that you have to announce? If it's thrown, then the owner doesn't know about it. He gave up hope. He didn't place it there. On the other hand, if the grain was placed, if the grain looks like it was neatly placed where you found it, afilu betzir me'achi, even if you find less grain than 2.5 pints, namilo, you also shouldn't be able to keep it. Says Rashi, v'derech asid lachzor ve'litlan. He's surely going to come back and pick him up. Okay, we'll continue in the next segment.